In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, Ameen. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, now and forever, and to the age of all ages, Ameen. It's great to be here with all of you. I've heard great things about Guelph Aqsa, and I'm glad to see all of you and meet you in person. So tonight we're going to be talking about faith and science, religion and science, and see exactly where they stand in relation to each other, what their positions are, and all of that. So, do you guys know what this painting is of? This is not a painting; it's a fresco. Have you seen this before?
Just ask me what it is. I missed it.
Have you seen what this is?
No.
Yeah.
You've seen it before?
Yeah, I think it's like a bunch of scientists I know.
Okay, close.
Or archaeologists.
Close.
Philosophers. Something.
Philosophers, good, okay. So this is called the school, and it's actually in the Vatican. And you can see here, it's a 16th century painting by Raphael. And you can see here most of the major philosophers of the Greek school of philosophy. So, judging by what you guys have learned, if you took any philosophy, you can probably tell some of the major figures. Alright, so we know the big three, right? Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Everybody knows about these guys. Can you tell which ones they are in the painting?
Aristotle, the one with the red
Where? This one?
Yeah.
Okay, so this this one is an older man, right? And if you notice, his hand is pointing up. So if you know a little bit about Platonic philosophy, and it's pointing up as the real world, the world of forms, is up there. This is kind of a reflection of that, an imperfect reflection. So this is Plato. Okay. Any other guesses? Can you identify anyone else?
Socrates is to his left.
This is Socrates? This left?
No, his left. Yeah.
That's Socrates, okay. So he's pictured here as a young man, and he was the student of Plato, right? And his hand is pointing towards the earth, towards where we are. The view is that this is where things are, this is where reality is. Very good. By the way, he was the tutor of Alexander the Great. How about their teacher? Anybody know where Socrates are? Anybody know about the Socratic method? Socratic method of teaching. So teaching something through questioning.
Yeah. I've heard of it.
You've heard of that? Okay. So let's find out here someone who's is talking to other people, questioning people, asking questions. Maybe this guy. Right? So he taught Plato, and he came up with that method of teaching, the Socratic method, the questioning, and he was sentenced to death by drinking poison for poisoning the minds of Athenian youth. All of his teachings on justice and so forth. Can you tell anybody else? Think mathematics. What's this guy here doing? What's he holding in his hand?
Is that some sort of pen? No. Compass?
Yeah. This is Euclid, the father of geometry. Okay, how about we go the other side? It's probably off the screen. You see here. here. This is Pythagoras. And he believed that numbers were the most important element in the universe. Anybody else? Anybody else see Alexander the Great? You probably would see it if it was all on the screen. It's easy to see.
Yeah.
But mainly the center is Plato and Aristotle. Someone is looking up, someone is looking down, someone is pointing, this is where reality is. Someone is saying, no, reality is here. Right? The question of what is real and the pursuit of reality, the question of faith or science has been on the minds of people for a very long time, for centuries, even before the coming of Christ. And I'm going to go through 3 sections tonight. Hopefully they will cover most of the ways people have viewed this, most of the answers they posited, and some conclusions that we can take out of it. So if we look at history, so I thought boxing is a good thing because it's faith versus science to see what's going on. The earliest thing I could come up with in terms of people looking at this kind of question is Plato's allegory of the cave. Anybody heard that before? Plato's cave, right? Can you describe it for us? What's Plato's cave? This picture that we're seeing here. This is, by the way, 17th century painting. So what did you see here?
So he theorized that there were a couple of people chained to a wall.
Okay.
And for years, all they know is living behind this wall, and all they can see is like shadows that are behind a fire, and all they could see are that these shadows are moving. And I think one day one of these people.
So these are the people chained to the wall?
Yes.
Okay.
And
then this is the fire?
Yeah, and the shadows of the people moving.
And these are shadows of statues moved by people.
Yeah.
Okay. And the shadows are here on the wall.
Mm-hmm.
So this is all they could see. All they've ever seen.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then one of the person, I don't remember exactly, he broke away, or he realized that he can break away, and he got out, and he finally saw that the life behind the wall, it's not just it, there's beyond that.
Okay.
And
So someone broke him free and began to drag him out of the cave. Step by step. First he sees the statues on the wall and the people manipulating those statues, right? He begins to see that what he saw here, all of his life, all that he ever known as truth were just mere shadows. So he begins to see the statues. Okay, and then?
He got out, and then he saw the light.
Okay, so he's dragged out of the cave, right? And as soon as he goes out, imagine being in a dark room for a very long time. As soon as you hit sunlight, what happens?
You get blinded?
Yeah, your eyes you can't look. So you see things, but not clearly. You see things that are kind of like shadows, sort of, right? Okay.
And then for a while, his eyes were hurting until he got used to the light. And
very good.
yeah, and then I think he go back and then tell the other people.
Yeah, and then he's going back. He's trying to get the rest of the people out. He's telling them, "I have seen the light. I have seen the truth. This is not all there is to reality. There's more to it than that. You've been chained in this darkness. You've been chained in this cave for a very long time. And come with me, and I'll show you the truth. I'll show you that these are not reality, and that these are not reality. Even outside, some of what you see is not reality.
Mm-hmm.
But wait a little bit, and you will be able to see it, right?" And it goes through the 4 stages. He says, first, imagination. This is where he is here. So what he knows of reality is just basically his imagination.
Mm-hmm.
That's what Plato's describing it as. And then here, he begins to believe that these are causing the shadows on the wall. And then he moves a little bit out and he begins to understand that the people are actually the agents manipulating these statues, which are causing the shadows on the wall. And then finally, the understanding. This is his highest level, highest stage. So he's trying to figure out what is real. Are we really here? Is our perception of reality true? Right? Do we even have access to reality? Or are we just simply chained with no hope of, chained in a cave with no hope of ever being freed? Fast forward to, well, this is in the 16th century. This is a painting of, anybody know? Galileo. Excellent. This is Galileo with his telescope, and he's trying to explain something to people. What he's trying to explain is how the universe works, based on the works and observations of pre-Socratic philosophers, as well as Plato and Socrates and Aristotle. By that time of Aristotle, the idea that Earth is in the center of the universe and everything revolves around it is pretty much kind of presented and discussed, and people have an idea that this is how the world, how the universe really works. The Earth, we always see it not moving, but whenever we look up, we see the sun rotating around the Earth, the moon rotating, the planets that we can't see, the visible ones. Well, they didn't say the visible ones, these are the only planets. The planets also rotate around the Earth. So this was called the geocentric view of the universe. Right? A few centuries after that, a man from Alexandria, a philosopher by the name of Ptolemy, in the 2nd century, kind of standardized this. This is the way we see things. This is how things are. This is what is taught in the schools. This is the basic, the default view of the universe. It's called geocentrism, centered around the Earth. Good. Fast forward a few hundred years to where we get in the 16th century, a man by the name of Copernicus. He publishes a work called positing that the Earth and other planets revolved around the sun in circular orbits. Okay? So this is kind of like a conjecture. This is kind of like a theory. He's saying that the sun, that everything is revolving around the sun, not the Earth. But he has no way to prove it. Okay? He really can't see far enough. He doesn't have a telescope. A few hundred years, less than 100 years after, and a man by the name of Galileo, he comes up with an actual working telescope from the designs of a person who came before him, and he begins to observe things. He sees things that tell him immediately that the universe is not geocentric. It has to be something else. Okay? He sees that there are moons around Jupiter. So there's something revolving around something else, not the Earth. And he also sees that the planet Venus has different phases. If it was revolving around the Earth, and if it was between the Earth and the Sun, it would always look a certain way. If it was not between the Earth and the Sun, if it was after the Sun, it would always look a certain way. But he saw that there were phases. It looked different based on its position around the Earth. So he said that there is no way it's revolving around the Earth. It must be revolving around something else. Right? And he begins to write things on heliocentrism, that the universe revolves not around the Earth, but around the Sun. And again, in circular orbits. That's all they can see. That's all they can understand. So immediately he begins to get pushback. And the narrative, the story that we hear mostly is that the church opposing the views of Galileo said that this is bad, but there are other things. It's the way he presented it in a kind of sarcastic way. He insulted many of the scientists at the time. He even insulted the Pope. When he insulted the Pope, was one of his most strongest supporters. But when he insulted the Pope, in not meaningly, the Pope called him to Rome and he said, "Come defend your views." So when he came in 1616 AD, heliocentrism was declared a heresy. He said, "You cannot teach this anymore. The books of Copernicus are banned. You cannot teach about heliocentrism anymore." Okay, but they let him continue his work. He continued his work. He published some more books and taught heliocentrism, but implicitly, not clearly, not outspokenly. And finally, in 1633, they arrest him, and they place him under house arrest indefinitely until he dies in 1642. So for Galileo, he's also searching about the truth, and for him, the Bible is saying certain things about the earth not being moved, especially in the book of Psalms. The earth, its foundations, the earth is not moved. But I see things that are not going with my understanding of these verses. There must be something here. Maybe I don't understand these verses. Maybe the church's teachings on these verses is not accurate. Because I see that things are not, that the earth itself is moving. That based on what I see, it's not geocentric, it's heliocentric. We move a few more years and we get to what is known as the Enlightenment, right? The age of reason, the scientific method. At this point, it's between the 17th and the 19th century. That's where kind of this movement was taking place. So religious, political instability triggered radical reorientation, the way people in the West, mainly Europe, in the way the people saw themselves, in the way the people saw themselves in relation to authority, the authority of the government, the authority of the church, and they began to question everything, right? Challenging these traditional structures of authority. And although not new, the scientific method was formalized. I mean, Aristotle, in the way he was pursuing truth, when he was pursuing knowledge, he was very much systematic, going step by step by step. So the thinking, the idea itself, not new, but it was formalized during that age of reason, during the Enlightenment. You make an observation, you come up with a hypothesis, you design an experiment to test the hypothesis, and you verify it. If it works, good, it gets stronger. Then you design more experiments to test it further and further to make it stronger and stronger. If not, you go back to the drawing board and adjust it, and on and on. This is the scientific method. So this is kind of like the history, very brief, very quick history of these major episodes in the history of the relation of these two things, faith or religion and science. So people came up with four ways of describing these relations or categorizing their views on the relationships. Because not everybody felt the same way about faith or about religion, rather religion and science. There's a story about this student from Africa. He traveled to the States and attended a lecture about integrating psychology and spirituality. So he raised his hand and said, "We do not integrate psychology and spirituality where I come from." "And why is that?" the lecturer asked. He said, "Because we never separate them in the first place." So the idea is that faith, again, religion and science are in conflict, is not something that has been the staple, the mainstay, has not been the view of the majority of people for a very long time. But there are different ways in terms of how people view the relation between the two, between religion and science. There are people who wrote about this, John Polkinghorne and Ian Barber. They categorized these kinds of, they said they fit into one of these four categories. And actually sometimes it's a hybrid between more than one. So there is the conflict category, saying that faith, again, not faith, religion and science are in conflict. They're incompatible. They're in conflict. The second was the category was that they are independent. They have nothing to do with each other. They operate in different spheres of knowledge. The third was that view that there's a dialogue between the two. There's kind of a work. There's a little bit of an overlap, and in the areas where there's overlap between religion and science, there's a dialogue and working together. And finally, there is integration between the two, between religion and between science. I'm not sure how this is going to work. A little video. So obviously I grew up in Age of the Simpsons, and this kind of summarized it. The first category is conflict, right? They're both in conflict, they're incompatible. Main reason is that people see that scientific rationalism and the rules of logic are incompatible with supernatural causation. Something cannot be caused by a supernatural agent, by something outside of nature, by God. So based mainly on the experiences of Galileo and Darwin, militant atheists, the new atheism, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Daniel Dennett, argue for this position that science and religion are inherently incompatible and as such are in conflict. Richard Dawkins says not only is science corrosive to religion, religion is corrosive to science. It teaches people to be satisfied with trivial, supernatural non-explanations and blinds them to the wonderful real explanations that we have within our grasp. It teaches them to accept authority, revelation, and faith instead of always insisting on evidence. The second view, independence. Religion and science deal with fundamentally separate aspects of human experience. Operating in different spheres of knowledge, science is descriptive, religion is prescriptive. They came up with the name non-overlapping magisterium, NOMA. And this was first published by Alfred Whitehead in 1925, and recently it was taken over by Stephen Jay Gould. Even Galileo might fall into this category by saying that the Bible teaches how to go to heaven, not how the heavens go. The third is that they are in dialogue in the areas where there's overlap. Science and religion are viewed as having slightly overlapping magisteria, as sometimes the why and how questions intersect with the what, where, and when questions. Therefore, the two enterprises are seen as complementary to each other for the benefit of the human race. And finally, integration. Productive engagement between religion and science has been the norm throughout the history of humanity and continues to be so. For a historical perspective, some point out that much of the current day clashes between the two camps occur between limited extremists, both religious and scientific, fundamentalists, over a very few number of topics, and that the movement of ideas back and forth between scientific and theological thought has been the norm. Some conclusions before we close. We have 5 minutes. So, contemporary philosopher of science writes by the name of Thomas Kuhn. He says, men whose research is based on shared paradigms. A paradigm is a way of thinking. Based on a shared paradigms are committed to the same rules and standards for scientific practice. That commitment and the apparent consensus it produces are prerequisites for normal science. Okay. The paradigm is necessary for 2 reasons. First, that the individual scientist does not need to always start from first principles, justifying the use of each concept as he goes up when he tries to introduce something. And the second is that the paradigm provides proper direction in which to venture. So this is based on 4 assumptions. The paradigm where the modern science exists is based on 4 assumptions. That the reality of the physical world is objective. There is an objective reality to it. Linear progression of time. The orderly functioning of the physical world, and that human beings are unique, capable of reasoning in discovering the order of the physical world. Penn writes, another philosopher, that there is no God. You know Penn, he's actually the magician. He's a magician, yeah. He has this silent guy, he's a bit shorter. You'll know when you see him, the ponytail. Penn, there is no God, and that's the simple truth. If every trace of any single religion were wiped out and nothing were passed on, it would never be created exactly the same way. There might be some other nonsense in its place, but not that exact nonsense. If all of science were wiped out, it would still be true, and someone would find a way to figure it all out again. So this is the understanding that science reveals the truth, and that religion is man-made. It's something some nonsense that a bunch of people made. And if all of their stuff were wiped off the face of the planet, some other people will come up and make up some new nonsense. Something that is not related to the truth of the matter. Science is related to it. Charles Hummel, he writes in a book called The Galileo Connection. He writes on the Galileo episode of what happened with him in Inquisition, all that. He writes, most working scientists seldom think about the presuppositions undergirding their work. Yet certain philosophical principles shared by members of the scientific community are almost articles of faith, without which there would be no continuity. Rupert Sheldrake, he's by no means a faithful religious person or anything, but he writes the biggest scientific delusion, he is a scientist, the biggest scientific delusion of all is that science already knows the answers. The details still need working out, but in principle the fundamental questions are settled. So we know everything, we just need the details, that's what we're really working out. There is no reality but material reality. Consciousness is a byproduct of the physical activity of the brain. Matter is unconscious. Evolution is purposeless. God exists only as an idea in human minds and hence in human heads. So he's saying these are all the fundamental problems of modern science. These beliefs are powerful, not because most scientists think about them critically, but because they do not. The facts of science are real enough. So are the techniques that scientists use, the technologies based on them. But the belief system that governs conventional scientific thinking is an act of faith grounded in a 19th century ideology, essentially dogmatic materialism. So some of the core beliefs that modern scientists adhere to, but without really critically thinking about them, is that everything is essentially mechanical. You're just a robot with all these moving parts. Once we understand the parts, we understand the whole, and that's all there is to it. Things like the mind, consciousness, memory, these are all reducible to physical processes in the brain. That's all there is. Free will is an illusion. Everything is deterministic. There's only one way things will turn out. Nature is purposeless. So these are some of the assumptions that they just take for granted. In science, they say faith is a vice, where in religion, faith is a virtue. This is just something recent in the past 100 years, the breakdown of Nobel Prize winners distributed or split by their faith affiliation. Mostly Christians, a majority or a big section Jewish, some atheists, with very little from the Buddhist, the Muslim, the Hindu, and some other. So, practically speaking, there are many scientists who do retain their faith, right? But the picture that you see is usually not that. C.S. Lewis writes that men became scientists because they believed that nature had laws. And they believed that nature had laws because of their faith in a creator. Modern science, writes Alvin Plantinga, a modern Christian philosopher. was conceived and born and flourished in the matrix of Christian theism. Only liberal doses of self-deception and doublethink, I believe, will permit it to flourish in the context of Darwinian naturalism. And there are many cases in the history of humanity, going back to Mesopotamia, to the Hindus, to the Chinese, to the Muslims, some Egyptians who started out with scientific discoveries, but because of the way they viewed the world, because of their faith, science in those cultures was still born. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows His handiwork. This is Psalm 19. We are meant to discover creation, and God through it. Right? If you look around yourselves in this room, do you see any creation here? Everything is man-made. Right? We're surrounded ourselves with man-made things. Right? So when we contemplate on things, we're only going to contemplate our own greatness. When we go outside, when we go to the country, you see nature, you see the work of God. There is the notion of Augustinian science, and that's the science informed by faith. St. Athanasius, in his writing on the Incarnation, in section 12, he writes, God knew the limitation of mankind, you see, and through the grace of being made in His image was sufficient to give them knowledge of the Word, and through Him of the Father. As a safeguard against their neglect of this grace, He provided the works of creation also as means by which the Maker might be known. We're meant to discover God through creation. God provided us in the Old Testament, humanity, ways of discovering who He is, formally through the law and the prophets, and informally through humanity's own consciousness inside, and through creation. And when all this didn't lead them back to the contemplation of God, the image Himself came to bring our senses back to God. The scientific method has biblical basis. We as Christians are called to pursue knowledge, to pursue wisdom, and understand, but rooted in the fear of God. We look at Job 28 and Psalm 111, Proverbs 1:7 and Proverbs 9:10. We see that we're called to do this. We're also taught that ignorance and foolishness are not Christian virtues. These are not virtues that we aspire to be either foolish or ignorant. We look at Acts 17:11, Romans 12:2, 1 Corinthians 14:29, and Colossians 2:8. That we're taught that testing, verification, and falsification are rooted in the Bible and applied to it as well, to the Bible as well, as a whole. 1 Thessalonians 5:21, 1 John 4:1, and Revelations 2:2. Faith is not a way of knowing something, but trusting in something you have good reason to believe is true. Science can provide evidence in support of a premise in a philosophical argument leading to a conclusion that has theological significance. So when we see people are presenting the idea that religion and science are in conflict, this is kind of like the popular story. But when we dig deep, we see that they are essentially looking at the same truth. That our faith in God and our inquiry into His creation leads us to the same truth. They're not incompatible. They are not contradictory. They lead us both to the Creator. I wish we had some time for questions, but we can take the questions outside. You can always email Catherine, and she'll field the questions, Catherine or Raphael. And it's been a pleasure. Thank you, guys.